Okay, well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers. This is the meeting for April 2025. Tonight's meeting is on the topic of sociable birding, which was, I thought for a long time about what this meeting should be called. Sociable birding seemed like the best name, but we'll see what that's about. Before we get started, a few quick announcements. One announcement is that our outing this month will be a week later. Usually the outing is the Saturday after the Thursday meeting. But this week, because I'm going to be out of town, our outing will be not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday. And there's information about that at carpbirdwatchers.org. We're going to go to Toro Canyon Park, which is a great place and should have some fun spring migration happening. And then just one other announcement is coming to us courtesy of Andrea Adams-Morden. I'm going to call up here. I don't know what the announcement is. It could be anything. So Andrea's going to come and make an announcement.
It's because you put your birding event on a perfect day. Look at the top of my head.
We have the technology. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so I'm with the Native Plant Society, and someone came to us and said, do you want to get involved in this really exciting project? And on the weekend, the 4 days of the 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th of April, there's going to be a BioBlitz that's international. And the thing is called the City Nature Challenge. And it started 10 years ago. This is the anniversary this year. And it was started by the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco and the LA County Museum of Natural History. And they had 2 competing BioBlitzes to see whose group of people could find the most organisms in their area. And it's called the City Nature Challenge, but often it's a county nature challenge. In LA, it's all of LA County. In the Bay Area, it's several of the counties that are around the Bay. And so in Ventura County, the Native Plant Society started a Ventura County collection. And up here in Santa Barbara, a couple of years ago, UC Santa Barbara started a collection for its students. You know, they were going to have a competition amongst different groups of students to see who could come up with the most organisms. And so now, well, I was thinking that I would start one for the city of Carpinteria, but they said, no, you can't do that because there's already a county one in Santa Barbara. And so what I'm trying to do is just let people know that it's happening. And instead of there being, you know, a small group of people doing it, more people in the county can get involved and do it. And so on the 26th, you guys who are going on the bird watch can go out there, and by using iNaturalist on your iPhone, you can collect not only birds, but plants and lichens and mushrooms and anything else that you see out there, like insects or, you know, mammals. Who knows what you'll see? Probably reptiles. And just put them on the iNaturalist app. It's a free app that you can get for either type of phone. And you will be part of this huge BioBlitz that 600 people, 600 organizations around the world are doing. There's people in the Ukraine, there's people in Africa, there's people in Australia. So it's really a neat thing. And at the end of the BioBlitz, you can find out how many people were involved, how many organisms were found, and maybe we'll have a few more in our county than there were previously. On Sunday, I'm having on Saturday, I'm having a group going to Figueroa Mountain, and we're going to be looking up there, mostly at plants. But, you know, if we see any animals, we'll record them. And then on Sunday, we're going to have one here in town. We'll meet at the Rincon, the end of Carpinteria Avenue, and we're going to do the Rincon Bluffs and see what we can find there. And so if anybody wants to come, all ages are welcome. All you need to do is have someone in your group to have an iPhone that has the iNaturalist app. And if you don't understand how to use it, bring it along and I'll teach you. It's very easy. So I hope some of you will come out. We're going to be meeting at 10 o'clock at the end of Carp Ave on Sunday.
This is not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. Is that right?
Yeah, on Sunday, the 27th,
Gotcha. Okay.
I think.
Can you forward information to me and I can put up a page
Yeah.
at carpbirdwatchers.org with
Yeah.
all the details?
Yeah, that would be fun. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anywhere, you can go, yeah, in the town.
Yeah.
Or you can go to Ventura and do this.
So we can do our backyard.
You can do your backyard, but it's only native plants.
Okay.
Not, you know, dogs.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andrea. I will be participating, so that'll be fun. We have to find someone in the group on Saturday who's going on the Carp Birdwatchers outing who's willing to be the iNaturalist
Okay.
scribe. Are you iNaturalist literate? Oh, excellent. Great. So we're set. Okay. I'm going to jump from that right into the meeting topic of sociable birding. As I say, I'm not sure if I was saying this after the meeting started. I think I was saying in the pre-meeting, it's a little bit of a different topic, but it's one I've wanted to talk about for a long time. So I'm finally going to do that. We'll talk about sociable birding. I think this is what I want to do. All right, so with any luck, you in Zoom are now able to see the slide that says sociable birding. And I'm assuming, Tom, that you're keeping up with the meeting participants. All right, I'm going to try and hide these meeting controls so they don't get in our way. So what this is about, again, it's kind of a personal viewpoint on this. It's not a complete exhaustive discussion of the topic, but it is a side of birding that has become more important to me over time. When I first started out bird watching when I was younger, very much a solo pursuit, something I just did on my own. It was pre-eBird. It was, back in the day, and I'd be out there birding on my own. And then over time, I've become more involved in sort of organized birding, group birding, co-founded Carpinteria Birdwatchers with Tom and Laurel and Jenny and others. And, it's a neat aspect of the activity, but as I've done it more and learned more about it, I've noticed that I definitely have a lot to learn about sociable birding, or this concept of how do you bird effectively as part of a group as opposed to as an individual. So that's what this talk is about. And it's very much not me giving advice to other people. This is me kind of reminding myself of things I've needed to learn and try to remember. I am very introverted. If you take those personality tests, I am the person who hates going to parties, wants to be off in a corner by himself. I like nothing better than to be up by myself watching birds. So being with other people, while it's, fun and stimulating and certainly very rewarding in the birding context, is also not something that comes naturally to me. So if some of the things I talk about seem really obvious, that's because they're not obvious to me. And they're things I've had to work at to understand. Because it's kind of about interactivity and birding collectively, I want the meeting to be maybe more interactive than these often are. I don't want to just talk myself, because that kind of, defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to learn and get better at. So you'll see there are opportunities built in for discussion. But let's just move on. So I have some photos here of birding as a social activity. Which, we in Carpinteria Birdwatchers, we are sociable birders. We go out together once a month and bird as a group. And it's a lot of fun, but it is different than birding on your own. So I have a bunch of tips, right? So this is my pet peeve. It's not all going to be pet peeves, but this is the one thing that if I could force everybody to learn how to do this, it would make my social birding more worry-free and enjoyable, which is people need to know how to give good directions. And I'm talking specifically about bird directions. So it's not like a bird comes up and says, how do I get to Patagonia? It's you're in the field, you're birding with people, one of you sees a bird and the others in the group or someone else in the group wants to see that bird but doesn't know where it is. So the person who is seeing the bird needs to tell the person who is not seeing the bird where to look for the bird. And there are some people who are super good at this, and it's just wonderful. There are other people who are really, really bad at this. And I think just by default, if you haven't thought about it, like I historically have been very bad at this and have had to work on it. If you don't really think about it, it's not immediately obvious what you need to do. But what you need to do is, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. So it's not enough to just look at the bird yourself and describe what you're seeing next to the bird. You have to come from the other direction. You have to say, look at this whole landscape. What is an unambiguous landmark that I can start them from, and a clear way to get from there to the specific spot where the bird is? So I have some examples. So here we are. We're birding at Santa Monica Creek, and a bird, let's say there's a Cooper's hawk perched in the tree there where the little red dot is. So how do you tell a person standing next to you where to look for that bird? And, the obvious first impulse is, well, just point at it, or just say, well, just look where I'm looking with my binoculars. And that'll get you partway, but it's not really good enough. It really helps if you can describe the location. And just to give you an example of like a poor way to do it, is to say, oh, it's perched on that big branch in the tree. I mean, that's true. And as you're looking at the bird, that makes sense to you, but it doesn't necessarily make sense for someone who's looking at the whole landscape. And this isn't even an accurate version of the challenge that person faces, because we've got a little frame around it. Like, we know that the bird's in there somewhere, but if you're out in the field, you've got 360 degrees you can look through. So, an example of the kind of thing one might say in this case is, okay, if you go down the path about 100 feet, there's that big dumpster, and just beyond the dumpster, there's that really big tree, that big sycamore on the right side of the path. Go about halfway up that sycamore, and there's a big branch that extends out to the right. Follow along that a little more than halfway to the edge of the tree. And maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Another key part of this giving good directions thing is you need to get feedback from the person you're talking to. You need to make sure that the tree you're describing and the tree they're looking at are the same tree. Because I've been in any number of cases where, people are trying to see a rarity and they're highly motivated. They really want to see this bird in the tree. And they're looking, and the person's giving more and more specific directions, and they're going back and forth, and they'll go on for like, literally 3 or 4 minutes before figuring out that, oh, the person trying to see the bird is looking in the completely wrong place and the directions don't make any sense. So you got to get feedback. So that was one example, but that was kind of just me talking. So is there anybody who's brave enough to do the next one and kind of give an example, and then we'll all critique, but we'll be very gentle, I promise. We'll be very nice about it. Okay, who wants to describe that bird? Let's say there's a green-tailed towhee hopping on the ground there, and I desperately want to see that green-tailed towhee, but I don't know where to look because I haven't seen it. Anybody in the room? Unfortunately, the people in Zoom can't do it because we have you locked down.
See the green stuff growing in you go to the end of the green stuff, and then you go to the left, and you see there's a reddish bush, and then you go past that, and it's on the ground before whatever that black thing is over there. I can't tell what that thing is.
That's, that is a decent, I'll bet you I would get on the bird. That's not bad. But it does kind of bring home to me just, like I gave myself an easy one because that tree was a really obvious landmark. But this one is harder, because there's, just, it's hard to be really, I liked your idea of focusing on the green stuff in the path and kind of going to the far end of that. Yeah, that was good. I mean, I think it's one of those things that 90% of the battle is just being aware of the issue. Because if you're thinking about it and you're actively trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, looking at it from their perspective, you'll get there. It's the people who drive me crazy are the people who just seem unable to do that. They just are like, well, I'm looking right at it. It's like, yes, I know you're looking right at it. Okay, how about this one? Laurel, can I pick on you? I know you're good at this because I've seen you do this before.
They go to the white covered, whatever that thing is, and you go the closest part of it to us in the third pole in going to the right.
That was good. Yeah, it's good.
As long as everybody knows where west is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the other, You said right, yeah.
But still, people always have that they might. be-
So you know who's really funny this way, and I'll go ahead and name drop. I don't think she's in the meeting, and I dearly love birding with her, so this is not meant as a criticism at all. But in fact, I won't even say her name. But there is a certain local birder who is not in the room, who really knows her plants really well. And I say that because there is a birder in the room who really knows her plants really well. But it's not Andrea, it's someone else. And I'll be out birding with her, and she'll be pointing out a bird. And she will do it by saying very specifically to the level of species what plant it is in. And I'm like, that's great, but I don't know what plant that is. But that's incentive for me to learn more about how to identify the plants.
On a tree, I usually use the clock.
Very good. Yeah. And I should have done that back here on this one. So at 3 o'clock on the tree, you know. You can just say that really big sycamore tree, that really big tree on the right side of the path. It's about 3 o'clock on the tree, halfway out from the trunk.
Yeah.
Boom, there you are. All right, how about, all right, we've got a spotted sandpiper working the shoreline there. And this one's pretty challenging. When I was putting these together, it's like, I don't know how I would say this one. Does anyone want to try and, sure, Jim.
If you keep walking straight along the beach, around to where the creek apparently enters the lake, the bird is across the creek. I'm losing my way here. Let's see. The bird is on the ground. The bird is on the ground. Pardon?
It's a little confusing because if you're walking along, you know, it curves out that way.
Right, you have to go around the curve.
Yeah, it's hard.
Complete around the curve and you have to come to the creek, and it's on the ground across the creek from where you're standing, something like that.
Yeah, that's good. This is a really interesting thing because I took this photo and was standing there, and I know that that's actually not a creek, that's a tree shadow.
Oh, that's.
But I think we would know that. I think you would know that if you were there in the field. This is a side effect of looking at a photo. But yeah, I think that's really good. You know, it's on the shore of the lake. It's across this little bay from us, right where that shadow comes in. This big granite feature up here. This is called Mammoth Crest. So I think I might cheat and say, well, if I know the person knows that that's Mammoth Crest, I can say, well, go to the left end of Mammoth Crest and come straight down to the edge of the lake. You know, it's just right of that.
More or less straight down, thicker shadow.
Yeah, and see, that's a really good example. Like say that thicker shadow in the crest, like when you're looking at it, that seems, you know, quite clear. But if you're looking, you know, without, like, it can be hard to know which shadow on the crest, you know, or what do you mean by a thicker shadow? And it's actually a much harder problem, I think, than it appears at first, just because people are, you know, good at confusing things.
See that tree with the light on all on the trunk?
This one here?
The light, there's a tree that just has the light on the very bottom of the trunk, and then you go straight down to the bottom.
Yeah. At this point, I think maybe I would fall back and say, you know what? It's in that shore of the lake just across from us. Just scan along there, you'll see it. Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to another bird. All right, so we've got let's make it something fun. It's a bald eagle is flying up there along the crest. So describe to someone, you know, how to get on that eagle.
What's that?
Mammoth Crest.
They start at the left, name Crest, go right. You'll come upon it.
I think that would work. You know, the highest bump in the crest. Although again, you know, the person's like, well, do you mean like from my perspective or an absolute elevation? You know, where people who are that I picked up a lot of the tips about how to do this from are the pelagic birders like Dave Perexta, who leads the, you know, Island Packers trips out of Ventura, because they have it down to a, you know, science. They're like, okay, there's a clock, you know, dead ahead is 12 o'clock, right, you know, starboard side of the boat is 3 o'clock. They talk above the horizon, below the horizon, halfway to the horizon, which isn't literally true maybe, but it's, you know, perceptually, you know what it means. And the other thing that Dave always talks about is they give one direction. So if there's a bird flying by, they want you to look at, they don't say flying from left to right. They say flying right, because it's noisy on the boat and it's hard to hear. And it's like much less ambiguous to just say the one direction it's moving in. So I thought that was a neat trick. All right, we'll do one more here. Yeah, I don't know. We're just going to move fast. I thought this would be more fun than it is. It turns out it's hard to do, which is why it's a problem in the field. I'd say, there's a bird. It's flying left under, below the right edge of Mammoth Crest, kind of halfway up to the top of the crest from the lake shore. I don't know.
It's over the bald spot.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, if it's a flying bird, by the time you get done describing it, it's somewhere else, But that's why it can be really helpful on a flying bird to at least give the direction it's going, because then as the person is trying and failing, they know where to shift over and look now, because the bird isn't necessarily where it was.
John,
Yeah, Jim.
you talk about not lots of arm waving and excitement to try to get people to stay quiet.
Yeah, and I don't know that I talk about that specifically in this talk, but that is a pretty key insight for the sociable birding experience. If you're in a group birding setting and, there's a bird that people are interested in seeing and it's relatively close to you, yeah, being quiet is very helpful. And, it can be frustrating to be in a big group of people, which, birding is a social activity and people are social organisms. We like to chat with each other. I do it too. And you get together at a rarity chase and there's a dozen people that you're friends with. They're all trying to see this bird and it's not there right now. So you're just kind of killing time and it devolves into a lot of chatter. And, that can be frustrating if someone is very focused on finding the bird, because chatter is not necessarily good for getting the bird to come out. All right, I think I have one more. Yeah, I wanted to go back to Italy in my mind, our Italy trip last fall. So we were in Poggiobanzi. So yeah, I know. I'm just going to zip through. I'm just going to look at the picture. It was so hard to see birds there. I talked about this. We have a whole meeting of me talking about how hard it was to see the birds, because the European birds, or at least the Italian birds, are more shy than the birds we have here. Right, because they shoot the birds there, right? So I'm definitely back to taking for granted how confiding and trusting our local birds are. So there's a bird and it's flying and it's above that biggest tree that's about 50 feet away in that direction over there. To the right of those 3 tall, skinny cypresses. It's a what tree? That sparse tree. That's good. That's good. Yeah, we're just going to keep going. This is just making me frustrated all over, because I'm remembering how frustrated I was standing on this spot trying to see the birds that I was occasionally hearing. All right. Tip number 2, we moved on. Use eBird. So this did not exist when I started off birding, but it does now. And it's the bee's knees. It's really great. I'm not going to talk in detail about eBird in this meeting. We'll do that in another meeting. There's lots of good info out there. I link to, in the description for this YouTube video where we're archiving the meeting, or on the website at Carp Birdwatchers that talks about this meeting, I've got links to a couple of really good short videos by eBird fans, sort of trying to introduce you to eBird and talk about its features. There are also official, introductory materials you can get from eBird itself. Just go to ebird.org, create an account, and go to town. It's just a really great tool. It's a thing that I couldn't have imagined how important a part of my birding it was going to become when I first started using it. But it really is just fabulous. I mean, it's great for finding out what other birders are doing, what birds are out there and where, so you can go see them. You can find locations, the eBird hotspots that are popular birding spots in an area, especially if you're new to an area. That's a great way to find, where to go birding. You can socialize. You can be sociable with the local birders from just looking at the eBird information. And it keeps track of all your sightings. So, you can use it just as a way to research and pull information out for your own purposes. But the real power I find, and sort of the sociable aspect of it, is for you to contribute your own sightings to eBird and make the tool that much better, that much more useful to the people who mine it for scientific information, or the hobbyists who mine it for their, hobbyist information. It gives you great ways to kind of slice and dice your own checklist. You can see, how many birds have I seen as of this day on each of the last 10 years? You know, how am I doing compared to the last 10 years? Which isn't something I would have thought I'd be interested in, but it turns out, no, that's actually pretty compelling. It's like, wow, I'm lagging. I got to get out there and see some more birds. Anyway, so I'm not going to talk about eBird in detail, but other than to encourage you, if you don't use eBird, try to use eBird. Think about using eBird. Give it a shot. I think you'll really enjoy it. Yeah, it gives you something to measure your progress against, which I find really motivating, you know, and it does this thing that actually some of the rest of this talk, in the negative version of this talk that I've always been talked out of giving, you know, I talk about the negative things, the birder problem, I've thought of it as, where if you get really into it and you get kind of competitive about it and you're really motivated by these like the top 100 list in eBird, you could try to be, you know, rank first in your county for species seen this year. And eBird shows a leaderboard and you see where you are on the leaderboard and where everybody else is. And it's very compelling, you know, it's like give people a way to keep score. And especially a certain kind of person will organize their whole life around trying to move up one spot. I like to think I'm more relaxed about it now than I have been in some previous years. I think that's sort of a normal progression that people go through. If they get really into it, then they kind of ease up after a while because you've done it, you know, and it's somebody else's turn to go be obsessed about it. But I was, as of yesterday at least, at the top of the leaderboard for the county. And that's because even though I'm saying I'm not obsessed about it, I'm obsessed enough, you know, and there are some, I'm probably not really at the top. If there are some people who've opted out of it because of some of the negative aspects of it, that I certainly can understand choosing, you know, I don't want to be in that rat race anymore. So there are some people out there who I suspect would be ranking above me if they were still allowing themselves to be listed in the top 100 rankings, because it's a checkbox. You can turn it on and off in eBird, whether you want to be listed there. Anyway, we'll go on. Tip number 3. So we have give good directions, use eBird. Tip number 3, report rarities with appropriate detail. So one of the really neat things you can do if you're in this community of sort of sociable birders sharing their information via eBird is you see a really cool bird and you can tell your friends about it. You can tell everybody that you saw it. And when you do that, it's really helpful if you can give the right kind of details. And there's two kinds of detail I think that are really useful to give. Which again is not maybe immediately obvious, and you don't have to, but you know, if you're interested in helping out other people trying to find the bird, one kind of detail you can give is, well, what would I need to know if I were looking for this bird myself? You know, some birds are just there and then they're gone and there's not much help you can give. But in other cases, there's a specific spot where you saw the bird. And maybe the eBird hotspot that you recorded it at, you know, is a big area with lots of places where this bird might be. So if you can say in the description for the bird specifically where you saw it or what it was doing or when you saw it, you know, those kinds of details can be really useful. And something that I have learned to do that I find very useful and other people do it is if you have your smartphone with your GPS capability, you can actually get it to give you very specific GPS coordinates, latitude and longitude, like big long strings of numbers. And you can just paste those in. And that's completely unambiguous. It's so nice as a person chasing after the bird to be able to say, oh, that spot right there. And especially if you're not that familiar with the location, it's much more useful to get the information that way than, well, you take the road down to the yellow farmhouse and it's at the third gate after that. And, you know, that's not as helpful. So that's one kind of detail, is sort of bird finding information. And, you know, if you're part of the local birding community, the avid birding community, you're competing with people so you know who wants to see the bird, you kind of know how much interest there's going to be in the bird. And some birds, there's going to be a lot of interest, and some birds, yeah, all the people who are chase-oriented have already got that bird, so they're not going to chase after it. But the other type of detail you can include when you report the bird is the information that the eBird reviewers want to see to review your sighting and confirm it. So historically, when eBird started off, there was no review. It was just people filled in their checklist of the birds they saw or that they thought they saw, and they submitted it, and the data all went in there into one big pile. And after a while, the more avid, experienced birders were saying, hey, there's a lot, like, I don't think this sighting is correct, or there's this whole thing where, especially for a less experienced birder, actually, that's not fair. It's true, I think, of all birders, regardless of their level of experience. They're all prone to this particular failing, which is you want the better bird. You want the bird to be the more interesting bird, the more exciting bird, right? So you've got this subconscious, push in that direction. The difference between the less experienced birders and the more experienced birders is the more experienced birders have caught themselves being wrong a lot more often. So they're maybe a little more aware of like, oh, I've got to be actually really careful. And the other thing is that the more experienced birders know more about status and distribution. They know how rare that bird is in this place at this time. Whereas for less experienced birder, it's in the book and it looks like this one and it kind of looks like this one and maybe it looks a little more like this one. It's like, yeah, but if you don't know that this one is a super rare bird here, like there's maybe been 2 reports of it in the last 10 years, and this bird is expected here and there's a dozen reports of it every day, the fact that it looks a little bit more like this one should maybe be weighed against the fact that, no, actually, it's probably the more common species. So as you get more experienced, you get that information as part of your analysis. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying that birds get misidentified. They get misidentified all the time. And as you start kind of being more sociable with your birding, being more open, being part of this larger community, your mistakes that you're going to make, that I make, are going to be more public, and you're going to get corrected by this layer of review, which is a good thing. But psychologically, it can be hard to think of it as a good thing, right? Because it feels like you're being questioned, like you're being told you're wrong, and nobody likes to be told they're wrong. So because in the early days there was no review and the data was full of a lot of questionable sightings, eBird instituted this framework of volunteer reviewers. And what they do is they take, volunteers that are drawn from the most experienced birders in an area, or those most willing to do the review process. And they go through the eBird reports and they set up filters that are designed for each species as of every date throughout the year, like how many they expect you to be able to see or normally, what is the standard for an unusual bird, like a solitary sandpiper, in Santa Barbara County this time of year, the filter is set at 0. Like if you want to report even one of those, you're going to trip the rarity filter. And it doesn't mean you didn't see it. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't report it just because you hit the rarity filter. It's a good bird. We want to know about those cool birds, but you should give this extra detail. And the extra detail they specifically want is the information that will let the reviewer say, okay, I'm confident that that person actually saw that bird. And what it does not mean is for you to describe your own level of expertise or your own level of experience with the bird, or how confident you personally are of what you saw. I mean, those are all kind of useful on some level, but they're not the main thing the reviewer wants to see. The reviewer wants to see you show your work. The reviewer wants you to explain, what did you actually see or hear? What was it about the specific things you saw or heard that made you believe it was that species? If you're aware of what it might have been that would be more common in the area, then you can certainly mention that and mention how you excluded that more common species, said, no, it really was the rare one because of this, this, and this. And if you do that, the reviewer will love you. The reviewer will be like, yes, that is exactly what I want. What the reviewer doesn't want is what probably the majority of rarity details are in eBird rarity submissions, which is continuing bird, or adult male, unmistakable, or, it's like, that's not what they want. They want, they want to see you show your work. What did you see? So, and I have an example here from one of my favorite local birds that I saw this morning. I didn't see this one this morning. Well, it could have been this one. But I saw a male orchard oriole, which is what this is. But, if you say continuing bird, unmistakable adult male, like if the reviewer knows you and knows you're familiar with the bird, that probably would get approved, but they don't like doing that. What they really want is for you to say, oh, it was you know, a small to medium-sized oriole with an extensive black hood, black wings, and a black tail, with the body being a deep ochre color or a deep chestnut color. You know, that can only be an orchard oriole, right? You can say it's got an oriole type beak. You know, that's probably okay to just say oriole type beak. If you want to get really specific, you can describe exactly what kind of beak, what the shape of the beak was. But that's what they're looking for. Again, not because, you know, like I think there was historically, and this is probably, I'll just do a quick version of this. This is me going off on the rant. Like I think back in the day, before eBird, before there was a lot of photography going on, before birders could really document their sightings. And by the way, a photo, if you have it, is way better than any description, because then the reviewer can just look at your photo and say what it is. They don't have to rely on your expertise. But back in the day, people didn't have, you know, a lot of cameras who were birding. You know, it wasn't a thing that people did. And so it was very dependent on your individual reputation. And it was very dependent on who you are. And are you someone who I'm confident can identify an orchard oriole and know how common or rare it is in the area? And I just don't think that's as important anymore these days. But that legacy, I think, is still there in the form of sort of a certain attitude on the part of some old school birders of a certain psychological makeup who view it as very important that you feel bad about your misidentifications. Like you should pay your dues. You should have to struggle the way they had to struggle to earn their current exalted position. And as you can tell from the way of describing it, I don't think much of that attitude. I'm of the attitude like, no, everybody's learning, everybody's making mistakes. We all started somewhere. It's fine. And especially in the era of like, you know, lots of birders with cameras, it's not as important anymore that you have this, you know, carefully crafted and preserved and embellished reputation for infallibility. It's like, yeah, we don't have to rely on, you know, how good a birder I am or how experienced I am. I can just show you the photo. If I can get a photo. Anyway, yeah, and I knew I was going to get off the track if I did it. Let's move on. Tip number 4, consider when you might choose not to report a rarity. So this is an interesting thing that I've kind of learned more about as I've kind of gotten into birding and, you know, been out there chasing after rarities because I want to try and get my number higher so I can compete with, you know, Steve Colwell or whoever who's beating me in the top 100 rankings. And to do that, you have to find the rarities because everybody gets the common birds. If you want to be competitive, you got to like go after all the unusual ones. But sometimes if you're doing that a lot, you will come across a bird that actually you probably shouldn't report. And, you know, there's different reasons why that would be. We'll talk about this bird just as a way into the topic. Now, I did report this bird, and others did report this bird, and this bird has been widely seen and chased. It's down by the Carp Sanitary District offices. I mean, I don't know that it is now. It's been a while since it was reported, but it has been there each of the last 2 winters. It's an adult male painted bunting. It's an incredibly beautiful bird. Everybody, I think, well, I don't know. I can't project everyone. I certainly always saw that as a bird that I would just give my eye teeth to see that bird. And, you know, never thought I would see that bird. And then one showed up in Carpinteria. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to see that bird. So I only knew that that bird was there to be seen because the homeowner who lives behind the sanitary district emailed me, because I knew him, and said, oh, John, you know, your Christmas count coming up. There's this bird that's been coming to our feeder. And it's a male painted bunting. Do you want that for your count? It's like, yeah. So he was kind enough to look for the bird on count day, and he did see it and he did report it. And eventually, you know, hanging out at the sanitary district offices behind his house, people started to occasionally see the bird back there and posted it to eBird. And I was probably one of the first who did that. And then all hell broke loose. And it was like you'd go there and there would be 10 people there or 15 people there, people driving up from LA, from San Diego, from wherever. And not just birders, also like photographers. And there is this whole overlap now. There are people who are birders first and also take photos. And there are people who are photographers first who like to take photos of birds, but really they're photographers. And you can get to the level of like professional photographers, like they are selling the output of their work. And it creates this whole extra kind of incentive structure, I think, where there are occasionally situations where you feel like, where I have felt like, oh, I probably created more harm than good by sharing that rarity. And I don't mean this rarity in particular. I would still probably share this rarity again. But I did subsequently get an email from the person who originally shared about the bird with me saying, can you do something about these birders? It's like I get up in the, they're out there at like 6 a.m. and they're talking loudly, which is not conducive to seeing a shy bird. So I'm disappointed in those birders for 2 reasons now. But they're out there talking loudly and bugging this homeowner who's like, I kind of wish I hadn't told anyone. And that's unfortunate. I don't want people to feel like they shouldn't share stuff like this. But it is an impact. And when you have a particularly gorgeous bird like this, or a particularly rare bird that is going to be chased by a lot of people, it's worth thinking about, okay, because it's like a one-way switch. You can not report it and decide, think about it, sleep on it or whatever. But if you're going to report it, every hour is making it harder for them to see that bird. So you should report it early if you're going to report it. But then once you've reported it, cat's out of the bag. You can't unreport it. So it's worth thinking about. And it comes up with owls. Now, this is a great horned owl, and I threw it in here just because it's one of the nicer photos of an owl that I've taken. Great horned owls are not super sensitive species in terms of not wanting to report them. But owls, for whatever reason, are super desirable for that sort of bird photographer type that I'm talking about. Owl photos are valuable because owls are shy and avoid people and have this mystique, and they were in the Harry Potter books and whatever. People really want photos of owls. And I understand it. Like, I get excited when I see an owl. Certain owls, though, are rare enough and sensitive enough to human disturbance that you probably really shouldn't report them at all. And that's the case with these owls. So that's why of all the photos in here, I don't have the location or the time of year. If you want to see owls, you can. It takes a lot of doing. You kind of have to know who to talk to. Linus Blomqvist, who was here talking about his big year that he did, one of the things he shared with me just kind of in conversations, like, yeah, it turns out for these big year birders, owl intelligence is like solid gold. That's like the stuff they really need to know because it's very closely kept. People don't want to share that because it will produce this huge reaction from photographers and birders. But in this case, I think the photographers are kind of the worst of the reaction, who will disturb the birds and try and get closer to get better photos. Yeah. So in eBird, you have the ability to hide a checklist. So if you really want to put this checklist, like I did with this checklist, you can hide the checklist and it just won't show up at all to other users. You'll still be able to see it. For certain species, and this is a spotted owl, this is one of the species that is treated as a sensitive species in eBird, it will automatically hide the location. And, it's not a perfect system. Like, you can figure out if you're obsessively looking at all the photos that have been uploaded in the county today, you'll still see the photo, even though it has the location removed. But you see the photo and you see who posted it, and you kind of know where that person, like, I figured out where these owls were because of information that was in eBird. Anyway, I mostly don't chase after owls these days. I kind of learned the hard way. Like, when I was first starting as an avid birder a few years ago, I heard a long-eared owl vocalizing in the evening, and it was really exciting because I hadn't seen a long-eared owl for many, many years. I'd never seen one in Santa Barbara County. And I posted excitedly about it to the mailing list, the SPCO birding mailing list for local birders. And I was like, could this be a long-eared owl? Because I was looking for confirmation, and I, very quickly got, yes, it's a long-eared owl. And actually, it would have been better if you hadn't posted that, because we're trying to keep that roost location private, because people will go there and they'll use playback. They'll use, they'll play amplified owl vocalizations to try and get the owl to respond, which can actually, with the case of long-eared owl, can actually make them leave the roost. They'll think there's a competitor there that they want to avoid. Did you have a question, Tom?
Oh,
Oh.
she's raising her hand.
Oh, okay. You know what? Let's ask Jenny to unmute. I think Jenny is certainly okay to Jen?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I just also wanted to add on the topic of special owls. The burrowing owl recently has been uplisted to a candidate species for State Environmental Species Act. And this is another example of an owl species that you should be very careful about posting locations specifically about. As a consultant, we deal with listed endangered or threatened species on the state and federal level. And this is something that a lot of people may not be aware of what those species, which species are listed, but it is a good thing to remember if something is considered rare, it's not necessarily also considered endangered or threatened, but these are another category of animals that we should be very careful about reporting
Yeah.
for the reason of harassing.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I don't want this whole meeting to be about it. I mean, you could do a whole meeting on this topic, but mainly I just wanted to bring up the idea that, as part of being sociable in your birding and interacting with other birders and reporting what you see in eBird, that you just be aware of these special cases where maybe you shouldn't share, maybe share a little less. And there's another example of that I was going to bring up real quickly. So in this case, this is a black-throated sparrow in Deer Park Canyon, which I just think is an awesome bird. There was a whole discussion, a long discussion with many participants for a period of weeks about whether or not we should be reporting this species from that location. And it's complicated. Deer Park Canyon is a really special place. It's up in the northeast corner of the county where there's a little bit of desert habitat that we don't have much of in Santa Barbara. It is public land. It's on BLM land or National Forest. I think it's National Forest land. But in order to access it, you cross private property. And there is an easement that the Forest Service has obtained or imposed. I'm not sure exactly the details. Like, you are allowed to go there. You have to follow a very specific route across the land of several landowners, one of whom is not happy that this, it happens. And he will come out and talk to you and ask you if you're lost and ask you where you're going and you're not hunting, are you? And all these not harassing. I mean, it's his land. He's allowed to, to stop you and ask you questions as you're crossing his land. But he's, it's complicated. And in fact, what we ended up doing, there was this whole discussion at the eBird reviewer level, like, we have this hotspot, should we add the access restricted label to the hotspot so people know you can't go there, which is what they do for certain places where you really can't go unless you have explicit permission. But the argument on the other side was, well, but it's not like that. Like, you have permission, you don't need permission, you just need to know these details of how to get there. And there's, arguments to be made on both sides, and many arguments were made on both sides. And what we ended up doing, and I realize not everyone, thinks this was the best outcome, but this was sort of the outcome we ended up with, is the hotspot is labeled access complicated. And there is an entry at birdinghotspots.org, which is a third-party website that has details of how to access eBird hotspots, that goes into great detail with maps and routes marked and descriptions of, what the issues are. So hopefully, if you want to go there and see this gorgeous bird, which, certainly I would understand because I want to go there and see that gorgeous bird, the information is there so you can do it, hopefully without causing problems. But it's another issue where you kind of get into this, well, do I report it or don't I report it? Tip 5. And as long as I'm on the topic of Deer Park Canyon, this is very much my personal rant part of the discussion. This is me talking about a choice that I have made and why I have made it, that I am not saying anybody else has to make. But I want to share why I made this choice. So this is the topic of pishing and playback. So pishing is where you imitate a bird's distress call. You go or whatever, and it tends to provoke a response from birds. They will emerge from cover to see what predator has been found and is being mobbed by this strange bipedal bird who's over there making this pishing noise. Or playback, where you take a bird recording on your phone and you play back that recording in order to elicit a response from a bird in the landscape. So I want to tell this story, and I've told it before. So if you've heard this story, I apologize. I'll try and go through it quickly. It was in Deer Park Canyon. It was this very same place, and it was kind of early in the obsessive phase of my birding career. This is after I'd gotten a camera specifically for birding, and I was really into getting photos of the birds because I was trying to identify these birds I couldn't identify, and it really helped to have a photo because then the experts could tell me, no, actually, John, that's this other bird. So I went to Deer Park Canyon, and I could hear these birds making little noises from the bushes, but I couldn't see them, these Bell's sparrows, which is what this is. And it's just a very cool bird. But they're very shy, and they don't see a lot of people in Deer Park Canyon. And I was, lummoxing around through the bushes there, and they were hiding. They were not coming out into view. So I tried playback, which, I took the phone that had the recording of the Bell's sparrow song, and I played the Bell's sparrow song, and it worked. It worked like a charm. Bell's sparrows are very responsive to playback. When they're the male birds on their breeding territories, they hear another Bell's sparrow that's singing in their territory, and they are going to get in your face and tell you, see what's going on, which is what this bird did. So it was so exciting, and I got this photo, and I was so jazzed because, I'd invested like 2 days going out to Cuyama and camping in this desert looking for photos of birds, and I finally got a photo of a bird. So as I'm taking this photo of this Bell's sparrow, there's a flash of movement past my shoulder, and this bird slams into the bush right where the sparrow had been a second ago. It was a sharp-shinned hawk trying to prey upon that sparrow that I had just photographed. The hawk did not succeed. The sparrow survived to sing another day, and the hawk flew off. But it really brought home to me, and as I've thought about it in the years since then, as I've kind of evaluated my own birding practice, it has really brought home to me that these techniques like pitching and recorded playback, the only reason to do them is because they succeed in altering the bird's behavior. And they don't always succeed, but they do enough of the time that birders do it. And some birders do it all the time. Just in general, they're going to try, the first thing they're going to try when they're trying to see a rarity. And so, well, do you mind if I try some playback? They'll say to the other birders there. And over time, I've become less and less inclined to say, yeah, that's fine with me. These days, I'll kind of say, I don't do it myself anymore because I've stopped doing it. I don't want to stop other people from doing it, except I kind of do. I want other people to go through the same thought process as I've gone. And if they view it the same way I do, then it would make me happy if they stopped. The way I think about it is this, that in the current era, we as a species, humanity, is doing so much to negatively impact bird populations. I mean, you can see the studies about it. We are living through a mass extinction brought about by human activity. And over the next several centuries, there are going to be fewer birds, fewer variety of species, fewer numbers of individual species. It's just not good. And in that context, for me to bother the birds more than I already am just by being there bird watching, just to try and get a better look at them, I feel like that's not really cool. Like, to my mind, this whole sociable birding concept kind of came out when I was a young kid birding and came to view these birds as sort of like friends. Like I was a very shy kid, kind of these days would be diagnosed on the autism spectrum somewhere, like I'm high functioning and all, but I was a bookish kid. I wanted to go out and be by myself or read books. I wasn't really, having a lot of social interaction with human beings, and birds supplied a certain amount of that, that sense of connection, that resonated with me emotionally. And so I come to, and over time have continued to think of these birds kind of like friends, they're like fellow travelers in this great mystery of life that we're all going through, and they're experiencing the world and I'm experiencing the world. And it's a great joy to me to be able to experience it with them. And friends don't get friends killed, I mean, not inadvertently just because they want a better photo, and so that's kind of how I feel about that Bell's sparrow. Like I made it break cover, I made it come out into the open because that's what I was trying to do. And I succeeded in tricking it into doing that. And it risked its life, like in a very real sense, like it was close, that could have been the end of that sparrow's life. And it took that risk because it's, evolutionarily programmed to take those kinds of risks in order to defend its territory. But as a birder, it made me feel like I was kind of doing a mean trick on the bird to exploit that and subject it to more risk than, to bother it more than I already was just by traipsing through its landscape. So that's why I don't use playback anymore. But it's also, if you're in a group of birders, it can be kind of aggravating if people are like immediately going to lots of playback. And even if you don't have sort of moral qualms about the playback issue, it's just kind of like, can we just kind of enjoy the birds and be quiet and see if they'll come out and reveal themselves? Maybe they would. Anyway, that's my rant. Done ranting, on we go. Tip number 6. So when correcting misidentifications, follow Postel's law. So if you, besides being a birder from the time I was a kid, I was kind of a geeky kid from the time I was pretty young and was really into the internet when it was just starting off before it was the internet of today. It was just sort of this cool subversive thing that we did with our modems and stuff. The early internet, one of the creators of it was John Postel, the late John Postel. And he wrote RFC 760, which was this early networking proposal guideline for the early internet. And it contained this famous piece of wisdom that has been sort of amplified in internet culture since then. He wrote, in general, an implementation should be conservative in its sending behavior and liberal in its receiving behavior. And this has been immortalized as Postel's law. So in communications, be strict in what you emit and liberal in what you accept. And he was talking about networking protocols and software that you would write to do this internet-y stuff. But he was also talking in a larger philosophical sense, and that's certainly how I think people have taken it. And it's how I take it, that, and this comes up in the context of sociable birding, because you find yourself in the position of correcting misidentifications. Someone says they think they saw this, and you look at it and you think, oh, I actually think it was this other thing. So how do you communicate that? And it is just an aspect of human nature that being told you are wrong always feels somewhat like an attack. Even if the person saying it is super nice about it, still feels like a little bit of an attack. And if they're not super nice about it, it feels like a lot of an attack, right? So Postel's law says, when you're communicating, be strict in what you emit. Be very careful, be very mindful of how you present this information to the person you're communicating to. And on the other side, if you're the person receiving the information, do your best to be very zen and very open and like, I will accept it in the, the best possible way. That's Postel's law. So I have this sequence of photos of great blue herons that illustrate, in a metaphorical sense, the eBird review process. So I send a lot of emails. It's I'm part of the local reviewer team. I'm not as expert as Jamie and some of the other expert reviewers, but I deal with the low-hanging fruit. When a person uploads a photo and it pretty clearly looks like they've misidentified the bird, I will jump in and send the email. I'll be like, let me send the email, because it's actually a fair amount of work to send the email according to Postel's law. You want to be very careful and very gentle about it. And especially with, people not having time to do that kind of thing, what can happen with eBird review and with probably a lot of similar situations is you end up just, being, there was a pressure in the direction of being kind of cavalier about it and just kind of dashing it off. It's like, no, it's not that, it's this. But that's not the right way to do it because, so the interaction as it plays out could look like this. You've got the eBird reviewer is the great blue heron on the left, and the user who has reported a species but misidentified it and accompanied with a photo, which is great, on the right. So the eBird reviewer is reaching out to tell the person, oh, hey, this thing you thought was a California gull is actually a Western gull with a weird looking beak or whatever. And the person on the left is like, the person on the right, the person receiving this is like, whoa, what are you talking about, right? And the eBird reviewer is like, no, let me explain. And the reviewer is like, no, get away from me. I'm not wrong. What are you to tell me this? And it goes on in these sort of territorial. And the reviewer is like, no, really, this one specific thing right here. And the poor user is like, no, I got to get out of here. This is scary. And, it's like, and that's the end of the interaction. And the territorial great blue herons had their own thing they were doing. But there is kind of this sort of ingrained territoriality that humans have as part of our makeup that I think you need to watch out for if you're correcting misidentifications. And it's not just eBird reviewers. Like any of you as birders, no matter how experienced you are going to have interactions with people who are less experienced than you. You are going to be in the position of correcting misidentifications. Once people know you're into birds, they'll come up and tell you about the blue jay I saw in my front yard. And you want to say, oh, that's great, which is really what you should do, right? But there's also a side of you that wants to say, oh, it's actually a scrub jay. Blue jays live in the, it's like, no. I mean, you can, but if you're going to get that information in there, helps to be very diplomatic. Yes, thank you. So the way, if you've received any of these emails from me, and some of you probably have, there's a standard format. It's like, it's a gratitude sandwich is how I think of it. I always start off by thanking you. Thank you for being part of eBird. I loved seeing your photos. It's so cool that you shared that with me. Then I have the chunk, the payload of potentially, hurtful information, kind of like, I'm thinking maybe, it's possible that, and I try and present it in a very like, gentle way. Like, I mean, the fact is, if I'm sending you this email, it's because I'm pretty sure you got it wrong and I am correcting you, but I'm doing it in this way that I want you to feel, not feel like you have to defend yourself. So it's more like, oh, these are the things that lead me to suspect that maybe if you could take another look, that would be great. And then I always close, the gratitude sandwich, I close with another like, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you out there again. So that's me trying to follow Postel's law. And then another lesson from the early internet. So I was a Wikipedia, I mean, I still am a Wikipedia editor. I haven't done active editing on Wikipedia in a long time, but for a while I was very into it till eBird kind of took all that time. But Wikipedia editors have this policy. It's one of the most important policies, which is assume good faith. It's an acronym. It's like WPAGF, they will cite it to each other in their, interminable arguments about edits that they're going back and forth about. But they want you to assume good faith. And the short formulation of it is, unless there's clear evidence to the contrary, assume people have good intentions. And this really helps a lot. This goes a long way. In the age of the internet, we're exposed to so many more people than we were before we had social media, kind of putting 1,000 people in our phone that we can interact with all day. But without a lot of the normal social cues. So if someone says, I think your Louisiana heron, that's not even, it's a tricolored. I think your tricolored heron is actually a poorly lit great blue heron. Like, you could say that thinking the way it sounds is, I think your Louisiana heron is actually a poorly lit great blue heron. But the way the person reads it could be, I think your Louisiana heron is actually a poorly lit great blue heron. And we lose those cues in online communications, and it's very easy for people to assume bad faith on the part of the person talking to them or the person they're correcting or whatever. So assume good faith is a really good policy. It really helps out a lot. Oh, yeah. So, and to illustrate that story, I want to talk about the beach. So here's Carpinteria City Beach. Wonderful place. Wonderful place if you're a snowy plover looking for a place to nest, because they nest on the beach. Not so much at the height of summer. Pretty hard for a snowy plover to find a place to nest there. And yet they have. So for the last 5-ish years, I want to say now, 4 years. I think 4 years, 4 or 5 years. Snowy plovers have attempted to nest, and in some cases successfully nested, at the mouth of Carpinteria Creek, down on the Carpinteria State Beach, right by the campground. And what you see in this photo is this little fencing that's been put up around a snowy plover nesting area. And it's surrounded by very busy activity of people. Snowy plovers are a threatened species that they are trying to nest here after a 60-year hiatus of not nesting here. Is very exciting news, and there are people whose job it is to help the snowy plovers in their recovery efforts. And there are volunteers, including me and several of the people in this room, who have gone out there and been docents for the snowy plovers in the summer and talked to people. I've found that those conversations really illustrate the effectiveness of the Wikipedia assume good faith policy. And I'll talk why in detail. So this is last week. So there is a nest there now. It's very exciting. The fencing is up. There's a wire exclosure that's up. Sally Gundlach told me about the fencing being up, and I went and looked, and I saw there was the wire exclosure, but I couldn't see any eggs or any plovers. But the biologist was there, and they put up the fencing. They must think something's going on. And then several days ago, saw that there was actually an egg in the exclosure. And so this was earlier this week. And the same, or maybe Sunday, I forget when it was, a few days ago. And on that same day, I saw there was a male plover seated on the beach nearby. And at one point, as I was watching, one of the dozens of people camping within, 50 feet of this spot came out with his kid, and his kid was fishing. And the dad launched a drone to go out and take footage of his kid fishing and have it go out over the water. And it was very cute and very pretty. And the second that drone went up in the air, that snowy plover who was next to that nest took off. And I've actually seen this behavior before. When we were doing our plover docenting at this spot a year or two ago, there was some environmental survey work being done, and these people had like official, permits to fly their drone, and they came out and flew a drone on the beach when there was plover nesting going on. And the exact same thing happened. As soon as that, you spend hours and hours out there watching these plovers as part of the docent program, you kind of learn their normal behaviors and how they react to different things, people and dogs and frisbees or whatever. Drones, man. A drone goes up and the plover immediately takes off and flies straight out to sea as fast as it can go, which I think must be like a response to like an aerial predator, like a hawk or something, like a land-based aerial predator. It's like, that's the closest safety for that plover, is to get as far out to sea as possible right away. So that's what they do. And that's what it did in this case. So, I'm not officially part of a docent program right now. We're not officially docenting there right now, but I saw this happen and I care about the plovers. So I wandered on over and I chatted with the guy about his drone and his kid that was fishing. And I said, "Oh, by the way, have you heard about the snowy plovers?" And he was, interested. So I explained. He thought it was the coolest thing. And I'm showing him the fencing and I'm showing him the exclosure with the nest. And after he sort of elicited, he's manifested this interest and this sort of, positive, good faith attitude about the plovers. I said, "And by the way, they hate drones. It's like the scariest thing for them. The second you launch that drone, that plover booked out of here and went off, off the beach." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll be more careful. If I'm going to fly it, I'll fly it over, away from this area." So I felt really good about that. And I've had the same kind of interaction with people walking their dogs. Officially, you're not supposed to walk your dogs on the beach, even on a leash. And people do it. And they do it with the dogs off the leash. And it freaks the plovers out, as it should. I've had basically that same conversation, though, like 3 or 4 times just this week with people as I'm down there watching. Like, I'm not spending a lot of time there, but even in the little bit of time I'm there, people are coming by with their dogs. And, maybe it's having the plovers, as the ambassadors, because everybody loves the plovers. You can show them the picture of the plover on my phone. There's 2 eggs the next day. There's 3 eggs yesterday. This was a photo I took yesterday morning. And now that there's 3 eggs in there, they've started incubating. Here is the female plover sitting on the eggs. Typically, the female plover does the day shift and the male plover does the night shift. This crow came up eyeing the eggs. Crows are major snowy plover egg predators. That's what the wire exclosure is for. It's to keep the crows from eating the eggs. And this crow was very interested in that nest. He's walking around. And the mama plover was not digging it. She was 50 feet away, just watching him the whole time. Did the distraction display where they kind of droop and drag their tail across the ground and go, "Oh, poor me, I've got a broken wing, come over here." Anyway, there's the 2, the male and the female together. The male's in the background. There's the female. There's the male. So, I just like sharing pictures of the plovers. I'm really into these plovers. But also I think it is a nice illustration for me, those interactions, kind of a part of the sort of the sociable birding experience is not just interacting with other birders, but non-birders, that these plovers need all the allies they can find, and birders are, certainly a good body of people to recruit into their defense. But just beachgoers, people who like being at the beach, even if they happen to like flying drones or walking dogs or whatever, they're still people who like being at the beach. And you show them these pictures of the plovers and they maybe start to get a feeling of, oh, maybe part of my enjoyment of the beach can include making just a little bit of space for these adorable little birds. So summing all that up, I think the sort of through line as I thought about these topics about sort of sociable birding interactions, how to be more socially aware in birding, was just to be considerate, right? Just to, I'm again with my sort of on the spectrum-y nature, I'm very good at laser focus on something, but being considerate means kind of not being laser focused, kind of taking a step back and considering the broader reality of the other people that you're birding with. So, be considerate of other birders. When you're birding in a group, maybe don't walk in front of the person who's looking at the bird, or maybe don't, have a long conversation about your bursitis while the person's trying to like actually see this bird. And of non-birders, again, like those people at the beach or just, people you come across, property owners, there's this whole issue about, oh, there's these really cool places to birdwatch where technically we're trespassing, but the property owners seem to be okay with it. So don't publicize the rare birds you see there, or maybe more people will come and then they won't be okay with it. And we want to maintain our access, but that kind of feels like gatekeeping and it's all complicated. But be considerate of other people's concerns. And be considerate of the birds, which is again where I come down on the whole playback issue that, I'm trying to be as benevolent towards the birds as I can. And of the environment generally, birding, I think, is everybody's birthright. It's this wonderful thing that's enriched my life. I want everybody to share it. I want everybody to be able to do it. In order for that to happen, we have to have places where it can happen. We have to have, a sense of collective ownership and consideration for the whole world that we're part of, the whole living, complicated thing that we are here in. That's my talk. That is the whole talk. All righty.
Very good.
Thank you all very much. I didn't really make it as interactive as I had planned, other than the directions. Yeah, Andrea.
They baby ones?
Yeah, those were young spotted owls. They had recently fledged and they were hanging out in an undisclosed location. I won't share it on the internet. Yeah, we have a few. And there's a few other spots that I haven't pursued them at that I've heard about just, through the course of things. We have small numbers of them are around. I mean, not close, like you'd have to, do some work to get there.
Bird camp. I was over at Lake, not Kitchener, the little one, there are narrows. And somebody found two
Long-eared owls at Lake Los Carneros.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, owls are special. I mean, I see both sides of it. I love owls. Everybody loves owls. That's why it's a problem, because everybody loves them. Lori is raising her hand. Yeah, let's, you know what? I think can I let Lori do video? Maybe if I make her a co-host. I'm making you a co-host, Lori. Maybe that means you can activate your video or you can talk. You should be able to do anything you need to do. Hey, Lori.
Thank you so much. Hello.
Thank you.
I need to commend you, John. Maybe it was 2 years ago, something like that. We were out in the field and you shared with me your embarking upon not using pitching and not using playback. And that really got to me. And actually, since that time, I have sworn off both of those as well. And it's truly because of you and for the exact same reasons. How dare I feel entitled to impinge upon that bird's life to the point, as you say, that it could get into harm's way? But I do want to share something that even goes beyond that, and I'm so troubled by it. Back when the brown thrasher was at Stowe Grove, we had a very well-known birder who came there and set up one of those little chairs and threw birdseed out. And I know that birdseed is a common tool used for sparrows, but it really bothered several of us. There were about 5 people there, really bothered most of us. And yet, we didn't say anything, and I feel to this day, I just feel as if I should have said something. So I want to thank you on the one hand and share that I think we all need to be good citizens, and being good citizens as birders mean maybe sharing with someone else that that's probably not okay. So my
Yeah.
2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I understand, exactly where you're coming from on that. I've had, obviously the same kinds of concerns. I'm by nature more likely to sort of hang back and grumble and not really talk to somebody about something that bothers me. But I think it's worth having those conversations. It's good if we can have those conversations in a setting like this, where it's maybe not so likely to provoke a defensive response. People have time to think about it and not feel like it's being personally directed at them. But I certainly do, appreciate being part of such a kind of rich birding community in Santa Barbara. It's something that I don't think we have everywhere. And I don't have that much experience birding outside Santa Barbara in a sort of sociable way. But certainly I hear from other people who come from other places who say, wow, this is really kind of amazing. You have this community of birders who know each other and interact with each other and have these, wrestle with these issues collectively and come up with solutions collectively. And, I think that's in part a legacy of Santa Barbara birders of the past who kind of worked to make that happen. Again, I think I don't want to say it's necessarily gendered, but there is these two sides, I think, of birding, and there's the sort of the hunt and the pursuit and the sort of masculine coded behavior of going out there and getting your numbers and competing to get the most of them. But there's also, this more, maybe feminine coded set of behaviors of building community and loving and caring for nature in a nurturing way. And both things are going on all the time, I think, and anybody who's into birding has both elements as part of their approach. I do think that I, as a birder in Santa Barbara, have really benefited from people like the late Joan Lentz and Rebecca Coulter, who ran the Christmas Count for so long and ran birding classes for so long. I think they've really contributed a lot to things that I really value and have come to value more over time about the birding community. And certainly I hope to be, to the extent I can, to, carry on the things they've done. And that's why I'm talking about this topic tonight. Okay, anything else before we break? Okay, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. Thank you, everybody in the room. And I'll see you if you come out, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday at Toro Canyon Park. We'll go sociably bird together, and we'll give really good directions to the birds. All right, bye, everybody.